Hello and welcome to the third edition of our series of podcasts entitled Connecting the World of Railways, a Conversation With, brought to you by the International Union of Railways, the UIC. My name is Simon Fletcher, Director Europe at the UIC, and it's my pleasure to once again be your host. Following on from the recent COP26 in Glasgow, where there was a strong presence from the railway sector, we will, for the next 30 minutes, focus on what was able to be achieved during the COP and what the railway sector plans to do as a follow-up to this COP and as a preparation for the next one, COP27. To guide us through this topic, I am delighted to be able to introduce you to our two guests, Lucie Anderton, Head of Sustainable Development at the UIC, and François Davenne, Director General at the UIC. Lucie, François, welcome to this podcast, and I'm delighted that we will have this opportunity to explore the core issues surrounding climate change, how the Glasgow Climate Pact can support the railways to design a better future, what needs to be developed, and how we can turn those developments into real game changers that will grow market share for the railways, and how the UIC can drive the programme forward.
Hi, Simon. Thanks. And it's a real pleasure to join you today and sharing some of the experiences and reflections from COP26 and looking forward indeed to COP27 and really raising the voice of railways on this global platform.
Yes, well, thank you, Simon. Well, you seem to have big expectations for the railway sector, and indeed there is a momentum, but I think we will see during this podcast that the road is quite bumpy for going there.
Thank you very much. And turning to the question, of course, of the green agenda and the advantages that the railways already have over other transportation modes, being the cleanest mode of land transport, how did COP26 contribute to the railway ambitions, and did the event match up to your expectations? How did the UIC get involved? And what were the highlights that stood out for you? Lucie, turning to you first.
Yeah, okay. I didn't have a lot of expectation, to be honest. It was my first COP, being just over a year with the UIC now, so it was certainly really exciting to be part of it. And we threw a lot at it in terms of we really wanted to be present and to really be there for our members and represent railways there. So we had a lot of events, which was a really busy time. We had 10 events overall, some inside COP, and some on the fringe onboard trains indeed. So it met my expectations in terms of really being able to make a splash and raise the voice of railways and have the really exciting conversations and just really show up for our members and be able to meet them in person and have some really inspiring conversations. So from that point of view, it was exceeded my expectations, I think, certainly.
And, of course, to organise the climate train as well.
Yeah, I mean, that was really exciting. It was more than just a train. It was quite an experience. The vibe that was on board that train was unbelievable because it was a real mix of people. There was NGOs, there was lots of youth activists, as well as policymakers getting on at Brussels, as well as lots of transport actors as well, all mixed up. And we were able to have some really exciting conversations and workshops all the way to Glasgow, where we were met by bagpipers and the local mayor, indeed. So it was quite a lot of a really positive start to the COP, I think, to have us sort of firing the starting gun for COP in a really positive way and having rail part very central to the story.
And then I understand there was a big youth presence on the train as well.
Yeah, it was fully booked and mostly really young people and really enthusiastic people that were really want rail to be an important part of climate solutions. So there was a lot of passion and enthusiasm for the fact that they were travelling by rail, and it was important to be travelling by rail. They were all online, streaming onto social media all the way, pretty much, and really taking part in all those conversations. So it was that young element is so important, and to raise the voice of young people at COP as well.
And I know, François, you were able to dip into the COP26 programme for a short period of time. What were the highlights that stood out for you as well?
Well, indeed, there is a momentum for rail, as Lucie explained. So we had a lot of young people, of activists, and also, some policy makers that did recognize that part of the solution for decarbonization is to be found in rail and public transport. But I think the most important, from my point of view, is that our position is that rail and public transport must become the backbone of mobility in the next 10 years is more and more something that is recognized. It's not an obvious position because we are repeating for some time ago that we should be the backbone of mobility. Well, let's be frank, we are not. We are representing at the global level 8% of the traffic. It's a little bit more true, perhaps, for public transport in certain cities, but we need still to work on it. So there is a whole change of paradigms that needs to be implemented. And I think all the events we participated in during the Marrakesh Partnership, during the Transport Day, we had meetings with ministers. I think what is really positive is that at the end of the day, most of those policymakers recognize that there must be a very important component of public transport and rail if we want to be serious about having an inflection by 2030. And that's what we have been preparing with Lucie and with all members. Well, the papers that we issued, the vision for 2030, Design a Better Future, it's about to show that without dramatic technical change, if we have a massive modal shift, we can indeed curb the emissions. Not only curb the emission, but also having a mode of organizing our cities, organizing our life that is more desirable. Well, I think that's for the time being, I think it's a little music that you will find a little bit everywhere. This little music, we have to continue to play it, not alone. We have to play it with the other organization, in particular with public transport. We have been working very closely this year with UITP, the Union of Public Transport Worldwide. We will continue, but we will also work with cycling association, with pedestrian association. We need to show that another transport model is possible, and not only possible, also desirable.
Essential, even, one might say. Lucie, we spoke a little earlier about the Glasgow Climate Pact. How might the content of the pact actually communicate into advantages for the railways?
Yeah, it wasn't a kind of big bang agreement of Paris 6 years ago. It was never meant to be. It was sort of really there as a really practical implementing the ambition of Paris. And while it was a bit disheartening to see some of the wording watered down towards the end of the negotiation, there was still an important pact was made and agreed at COP26. And it's a lot about the finance. So we talked about how it was important to have the transport ministers present at COP, which we're starting to see more and more happening, but even more important, starting to see the finance ministers showing up at COP. And so what was important is there's actually now real commitment for that flow of money, particularly for the more developed countries to underdeveloped, to help mitigate and adapt to a changing climate. So we can see that with a new rule book that's been set in the Climate Pact, Article 6 has been approved. And so that means that the accounting process is now in place so the money can start to flow. So we could see there's real opportunity there for public transport and rail infrastructure, rolling stock investment from this kind of financial flows, because public transport and rail, of course, is a climate solution that needs to be invested in. I mean, it's also a lot of private investment as well that was announced there. So the Glasgow Financial Alliance also agreed to net zero ambitions and are talking about aligning their portfolios to Paris Agreement goals and talking about $130 trillion of private finance moving in that direction. So there's huge opportunity. So I think it's just how do we now help our members to make sure that we're putting forward projects and making clear that they're the right place for this kind of investment, because the opportunity is golden.
And I think we'll come on to the narrative that needs to be taken forward as a result of all of that. Would you say then that the financial framework that was in place before Glasgow has changed, or is it the same but just more people are now perhaps more aware of the need to start paying for some of this change?
The finance was not, the commitment was made in Paris and the money never turned up. There was a gap in the amount of money that was committed to and the flows just haven't happened. But the pressure is there to get that back on track. And we've got the accounting system now that will allow for those voluntary, essentially carbon offsetting between countries so that developing countries can be paid by developed countries to deliver their nationally determined contributions, many of which have got plans for expansion of public transport quite central to them. So the frameworks there is much more mature now to allow that flow of money.
François, do you think within the UIC that there is a similar sort of network or framework whereby the developed railways can actually start to help the less developed railways to improve, to grow?
Well, UIC is about solidarity and universality. So we are a technical organization. So basically, we are helping our members through our capacity to mutualize, to inspire. And that's also one of the important aspects of UIC, to design the tool for receiving those financial means for developing rail and public transport. So I think that it will be very important in the coming years that we develop our financial expertise and our capacity to talk to the international development institution, whether they are bank or public bodies, to be sure that there is a framework, an ecosystem, some guidelines that will help our members, in particular in developing countries, to be able to rely on those new sources of financing.
There are, of course, a range of aspects that now need to be built upon. Lucie, you highlighted one or two that have emerged as a result of COP26. To help that programme, the UIC produced the Design a Better Future, a Vision of Rail by 2030 document as a kind of narrative in the run-up to COP26, and it's now planned to prepare a manifesto for the next phase of development. François, how would you describe what needs to be achieved? And Lucie, perhaps you can then pick up on how you believe it will be possible to measure the success of that approach.
Well, I think there is two questions in this question. There is a question about what and a question about when. And I will start about when, because what was quite important, and there again it was a little music in the COP26, is that 2050 is obviously a target for decarbonation, but the actual target is to do really something massive for 2030. And that is new, because we have all read the IPCC report, and we do know that if we don't act very fast, the carbon emissions, they will not go into the toothpaste tube. That's like the toothpaste. You cannot, will not be able to have the carbon back into the air. So we need to act very rapidly. That means that if we have 10 years, there is no technological silver bullets that will help us. There will be perhaps some technological silver bullet for aviation and for cars, basically by 2050, in particular with energy production. But for the next 10 years, rail and public transport are electrified, are emitting very low quantity of carbon, are really the solution for having cities where there is air quality that is really better, that our fellow citizens have a better health, and that we can really recover the public space of our cities to our day-to-day activity. So we have a solution that is a solution for today. What we need is indeed to have a model shift and a new approach of transportation. Perhaps there are two figures. 70% of the emission are in urban areas. So that means that if we are able to cope with the problem in urban area, we have a solution. And the average length of the transport is 15 kilometers. That means that a huge amount of transport can be made with bike, with other mode of transport that individual cars, if we have the solution based on public transport and rail. And once again, those solutions are very close to us. There is no huge innovation. There is no complete change about a production chain. We can do that relatively fast. And what we need to do at our level, at the level of our industry, of our railway industry, in conjunction with public transport, is to show that we have the what, that we can deliver actually those incremental innovation. And that will be the second part, what can be delivered. So we are working on that as a sector. I will here speak mainly about railways, but I will speak also about interconnections. We will have a seminar in a few days on the end of November, suggest of November, 1st of December, to try to have some kind of technical roadmap to decide what will be the key incremental innovations that will allow indeed to make this change of paradigm feasible and desirable. Well, I will not enter too much into the matter. Perhaps we will do another podcast on this kind of subject. But basically, what we need to do is to increase the capacity of our network with digitalization and to be able to connect all the public transport mode in order to have a seamless transport. And if we do that, if we are able to offer to our fellow citizens a way of using a transport system that is seamless, that is interconnected, that is comfortable, that is also affordable, and where all the information flows seamlessly, that means that today what is really an obstacle to public transport is that it's very complex, and there is also a lack of real-time information. You never know when your metro will arrive, you never know when there is a disruption, there is a lot of problems into interconnecting all those very complex information systems. But the good news is that the solutions are there. We will be soon implementing 5G in railways. Most of the public transport system will also rely on some 5G for interconnecting all those very complex objects. So we will be able to make our systems, our networks, much more intelligent than they are today. And not in 20 years or 15 years, but really in the next 5 or 7 years. So that means that this future that we are drawing, a future where we will be using increasingly soft mode of transport, cycling, walking, in conjunction with public transport and rail, can be implemented. And I will finish there. We need to demonstrate that we are serious. And I think we have serious argument for establishing that. Indeed, well, let's take an example. We are speaking about autonomous vehicles since quite a long time. And there have been some kind of hype 5 years ago that autonomous cars will be next door. What we can see today is that autonomous cars are not next door. There is huge safety issue. There is huge technological and even scientific issues before to have autonomous car. But what we can probably say is that autonomous trains are there. There are already autonomous trains in Europe, in China. They are functioning safely. It will be a huge progress in the way to increase reliability and capacity and also to much more energy efficient. So we are a sector that is able to deliver. And UIC has a quite modest role. That's the role of mutualizing all those initiatives. And what we will do in the next year is to really select the transformational projects that will make this new paradigm possible, to help our members to implement them together in a coordinated way. And I'm pretty sure that we will be able to deliver at the end of the day.
Right at the beginning of this podcast, François, you said that this was the topics are going to be a significant challenge. And I think everything you've just outlined tends towards putting some flesh around that significant challenge. But Lucie, looking forward a little bit, perhaps, how do you think that we should be in a position to measure the success of this significant challenge that François has just outlined?
Yeah, I think, it's been really important to sort of tell this story, this really optimistic future, but we need to start talking about how we get there and know how far away we are and how we can start moving towards that. And actually, a big part of the climate finance we've been talking about as well is being able to demonstrate very clearly, factually, that we are a sustainable form of transport and we are bankable in that we can be a good investment. And so data and measurement and reporting is absolutely essential to be able to get the kind of investment that we need. And I think UIC are in perfect position to help global railway community to get better at that. We've been working on a project to do that, in fact. The SDG Rail Index, which is in later forms of development now, is going to be a new way of measuring how sustainable our operations are, our members are, and it'll be free for them to all use, be able to demonstrate the contribution to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, including the important one of climate mitigation as well. So I think that's going to be something we're working with the World Bank and with other institutions to test that it's going to be really helpful for them to know that we'll be clearly demonstrating our journey towards this future and vision of rail in 2030 and that we're a really good investment.
And François mentioned just now, talking about the intelligent systems that need to be in place, the intelligent components that we will have in the system. Having things that are intelligent tends then to suggest that we will become more frugal in the way in which we operate the network. And I think that level of energy saving or longevity of components or even recycling is something that we can do to measure the success of that we're tackling this whole issue. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and we're incorporating measures around circularity and trying to define what we mean by circularity and measure the inputs and the outputs so that we can start to see how good we are at this kind of thing. So yeah, we're working on that, and it's a really interesting place to develop, and all of our members are saying it's important for them as well.
And I think, therefore, we've got the opportunity to, over the next 12 months, to be developing some of this as we start to ramp up the thinking of how the railway community would engage in COP27, which will take place in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt this time next year. But just going back to COP26 for a minute, we've seen news clips and YouTube and LinkedIn and all kinds of other pieces of mediatic that part of the main event of COP26 was the demonstration of a train powered by battery and another that is using hydrogen. In fact, Lucy, you were even able to hold a series of workshops, I believe, on at least one of those trains. Imagine as a career first, that's probably up there with the best, being able to do that on this modern form of traction. What were you able to conclude from the discussions you had on board the train, and what would you be able to take forward, do you think, as a result of what you learned there into COP27?
Yeah, so one, we had a great event on board the battery train. That's the Viva Rail train, an old London Underground train that's been retrofitted with a battery. And we had lots of conversations about how we can bring more renewable energy and circularity into the way that we operate railways. And so there was loads of really exciting exchanges around what different rail organisations are doing in this space. And there's some really inspiring and innovative ways that we can start reusing and lengthening the life of many products within the railway. It's something that I think the Railways has been really good at for forever, really, and I think continues to do that. And I think it's just sharing those kind of things. And so I think we'll share some clips with you in this podcast of some of the stories that are told on that train that was really exciting. The second week we went on the hydrogen-ready train, which again was the retrofitted train owned by Porterbrook. And they actually had a boardroom, a conferencing room on board that we were able to have some great conversations on board as well. And we heard from our members all around the world about their vision for 2030 as well. And so we'll be able to share some clips from what was talked about there.
And picking up on what François was saying earlier, François, I think Mohammed Mazgani from UITP was involved in that as well. And I guess the shared messages that were coming out of that are really important as part of the next phase of development.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely fundamental that we have a united perspective with public transport. And with Mohammed, we have been preparing quite intensively with Mohammed and his teams this COP26. And for COP27, I think we have to increase this effort. We have to show that very concretely we are bringing solutions that are close to completion, that basically we can give the low-hanging fruits that our policymaker needs to show that indeed the future we are aiming to is a future where we will have solutions, not really expectation on some technological breakthrough that will happen or will not happen or will have some effects that we cannot really master, but that there is something that is very concrete, very predictable and very serious. Perhaps a little bit dull. Yes, indeed. We are a very serious sector, railway and public transport, a little bit dull perhaps. But at the end of the day, we are able to deliver something that is absolutely concrete and feasible. Let's take a regional example. What we did for freight between UIC and CR, the initiative that is called Rail Freight Forward. We started 4 years ago with a very simple message. We need to double the modal share of rail freight in 2030. And we explain why and we explain how. And what is happening now is that first, in the new Green Deal, this very objective has been taken on board. doubling the modal share of rail freight by 2030. And second, that the financing for that is developing, because we need to have some innovation to be made, and we are developing them collectively at the sector level. So that's exactly the kind of thing we need to do at the global level. And for UIC, we intend to continue and to be the place where we will discuss, we will have the idea, we will do the mutualization. But once again, we have to be very concrete, and we have to be with partners. Because obviously rail is not the solution for everywhere, but the solution and for every mode. But the solution is in the integration. In a frugal way of thinking, we need to have the mode of transport which is the most frugal, which is limiting the most the emissions. And nowadays, we are this mode of transport. So we need to be bold. We need to give a very precise agenda. We need to deliver. And well, I should say that I'm very optimistic, and I hope that in the COP27 we will be more present and still able to deliver this music that will perhaps be still a little music, but with more audience next time.
We're almost out of time on this podcast now, but I just wanted to pick up on the point that you made there, François, about we are a very serious sector, and that level of seriousness equals the reason why the railways are indeed the safest form of land transportation, and that's something which we also, coupled to this dynamic related to sustainable development, we need to be making sure we are managing collectively. I'd like to thank Lucie, and you, François, for the clear image and the strong narrative that you've provided and the perspectives you have shared with us this today. In order to provide a flavour of the topics discussed during the COP, we're now going to listen to extracts from a number of conversations that we were able to capture. First, we hear from Christian Chavanel of the UIC and Ms. Ilse de Vos van Eekeren from NS, who were in the battery train at Glasgow discussing the theme, how to make the greenest collective mobility even greener.
I will give details on technical points, how the UIC will help for COP26 and for the decarbonization of the railway system. So we will work how to increase the railway capacity. If we want to have modal shift, we need to increase the railway capacity. So we will work on the traffic management system with our members, control centers. You know that we are drafting the specifications for 5G from CS, and 5G will be a key enabler for every innovation. We will work on automation, because if we want more passengers, more freight, we need to automate. And so first we are part of the digital automatic coupling program, and we will work on ATO from an operational point of view. If we have ATO, we will have to change the operational rules for the railway undertakings and for the infrastructure managers. A key added value of UIC is to prepare the operational rules. If we do that, we can harmonize the operational rules for different railway companies, and then we can accelerate the market uplift or innovation. Something else, we want to promote lighter trains. Lighter trains, less than 10 tons per axle. It's probably very important if we want to increase the number of passengers in sparsely populated areas. And if we want to promote trains with classical trains, it will not be possible. It will be too expensive. So we want to promote lighter trains with other operational rules, less expensive maintenance for the rolling stock, less expensive maintenance for the infrastructure. Another thing, we will continue working on noise, of course, because if we want to increase the number of trains, we need to convince the neighbors that the trains is for them, not against them. And we want to work on the resilience to climate change, the resilience of infrastructure, and the resilience of rolling stock. For that, 3 parts: how to prevent, how to protect, how to predict. How to prevent, for the new lines, for the new rolling stock, we should design more resilient equipment, how to protect if we absolutely need to avoid operations just before big storms, floods, and so on, and how to accelerate just after disruption, and we will have more disruption because of climate change, how to accelerate, how to reduce the length of a disruption. If we want to promote railways, let's do that.
Dutch Railways on the Department of Sustainability. And after walking and biking, because I'm from the Netherlands, so we bike a lot, so after walking and biking, railway is the most sustainable mode of mobility. And we want to make that sustainable mode even more sustainable. So that's why we are working towards fossil-free and 100% circular trains. Since 2017, all our trains in the Netherlands, they run on wind energy, so they're actually climate neutral. And what was pretty cool about this first major step, now first of all the trains are climate neutral, so we can offer our travelers a climate neutral train ride. But we ask for new renewable energies, because we use about 2% of the energy in the Netherlands for running our trains. And if we take it from the market, then we have green trains, but the Netherlands will not be any greener. So we ask for additional new renewable energies. So actually build new windmills to create energy for us. And we didn't do it by ourselves, we did it together with the whole railway sector. For example, ProRail also joined us, but also the other train operators of freight, of passengers, they also joined this contract. So that way we could even make more impact. So nowadays the trains are climate neutral, but that's just the first major step, because that's the nice thing about sustainability. You can always do better. So now we are working on, for example, hourly matching, and we are working to make the trains more energy efficient. And over the last 15 years, we already reduced the energy use with 30%. And for the next years, we also have the goal to reduce the energy of the train every single year with 2%. And we do that, for example, by eco-driving. To actually learn our drivers how to drive eco-friendly. We do it also by making our trains more energy sufficient. For example, by making the train more aerodynamic, make the train lighter, put intelligent light control inside the train. And we're doing all this to make it, to go towards our goal of fossil-free. On the other hand, we're also trying to create 100% circular trains. At this moment, we are quite close, since we already reached the 99% circular with our trains. After 20 years, the lifetime of the train is expanded. Then it's technically the end of the technical lifetime. And then we have two options. We can buy a new train, or we can make the old train brand new, so it can run again for 20 more years. And that's what we're actually doing at this moment in the Netherlands with our double-deck trains. So here you see double-deck buses, but we have double-deck trains. And about 86% of the old train, we make it as new and put it back in exactly the same train. So those materials can run for another 20 years. And the materials that cannot be back in the train, we give it a new destination outside the train.
Now let's hear from Mohammed Mazgani, Secretary General of UITP, who was in the hydrogen train and who shared with members and with our own François Davenne his thoughts on the key accelerators for a shift to public transport.
And so it means that we have to show them what we can bring to the citizens, to their voters. And if we show what we can bring to voters, then they will be happy. And there they think, and that's why it's important also to share some figures, and not just figures about the scientific figures or figures about coming from our sector, but also figures coming about what people expect. And there is one survey recently, it's a Eurobarometer survey, and asking European citizens from 6 countries, I think Germany, France, Italy, Spain, I don't think UK was part of it, but 6 countries, and asking them what are your preferences for urban mobility? And you see 83% of the people said we want more walking, cycling and public transport. But the problem we have is that public transport projects are long-term projects, and often we take a decision during a mandate, and the inauguration of the metro system or the trains, or it takes place at the next mandate or 2 mandates later, and maybe not by the same, and probably not by the same mayor or the same minister. And so that's why we need to show them that there are also some I would say quick wins during their mandate. So we need really to show them that at the different steps of the project, they can gain credibility, they can gain acceptability by the population, and then it will help them to be re-elected. So speaking their language and not speaking our language. And this is something we have to learn, because in public transport we are not strong in doing that. Even when now with the focus on customer, we start now speaking the language of the customer. But when I look years ago, it was not the case. And this COVID actually crisis came with a great opportunity, because the COVID crisis has shown the essential role of public transport during the lockdowns, and how public transport, the continuity of the service of the public transport service. So these are elements which go in favor of public transport. So we need to capitalize on that. It's important to capitalize on that to try to convince the policymakers. But definitely we need to speak their language and not try to convince them with their own way of talking, I would say.
And then a number of other people shared their vision of rail for 2030. Let's start with Wim van de Kamp, former member of the European Parliament.
And my expectations in 2030 for international rail connections are very high. First of all, we have to use the results of COP26 to extend our international railway schemes. I think this is a wonderful opportunity to promote clean transport and not only talking about ugly transport. Secondly, border denying traveling. So we have to deny the borders and promote international railways. Then of course, better ticketing. Ticketing is still a challenge, especially when you compare it with aviation. Then my fourth point is the Eurolink, the so-called timetable, and we really have to establish this before 2030. And my fifth point, it's the point of the money, it's the point of NIMBY, not in my backyard. Please promote rail infrastructure. We have already a lot in Europe, but there are some knots which are not well connected. And these are the 5 challenges for 2030.
Now comes the turn of Raynette Wissenberg from ProRail.
ProRail, the Dutch infrastructure manager. And my vision for railway in the 2030s is definitely more people on trains and more stuff being moved by trains. So basically better utilization of all the capacity we already have, and more people and companies that use the train. The main reason for that is actually that I hope that it's not only more, but that it means that people have really decided to stop flying or drastically reduce their flight, because that is where the carbon emissions in transport come from mostly. And climate change urges us to get those carbon emissions down. Railway is part of the solution. Let's use it.
Let's continue with Mike Muldoon from Alstom.
The railways in 2030 will be taking the strain, taking people away from the roads, moving people efficiently, safely and quickly to where they want to be, in a way that we're only becoming used to even now. We have so much potential with the railways to take the strain and move things forward in a carbon-free way.
I'd like to thank them all for their contribution. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening. Please forward this to all your friends and colleagues, pass the message, and please keep an eye out for the announcement of the next podcast. François has already given you a little bit of a taster for that as we move forward. A big thank you to the production team. You can't see them, but we can. And from us all here, thank you very much and goodbye.